Chapter 5. Cassidy spent the rest of the day helping the men acclimate to their new environment. She'd had to explain what everything was inside the apartment, right down to the carpet and what the walls were made of. Teaching the men how to use the toilet had been a bit of an uncomfortable chore, but they managed to pick it up quick enough that she hadn't had to teach them twice. Showing them the television had been an experience. They at first had thought the people on the screen were actually inside the TV, and when she changed the channel, she'd killed them to replace them with others. Teaching the Wolf brothers all about modern life, it showed Cassidy how much she took those things for granted, how much easier it made day-to-day living. She now sat on the couch watching TV. The men were taking turns in the shower, something all of them so far appeared to love. They took longer ones than she did. Cassidy was thankful she didn't have to pay for water since it was included in her rent. Edensaw stepped out of the bathroom. A waft of steam billowed around him, spilling into the short hallway. He wore only his underwear, which made more sense than being naked. She'd had to explain how most people didn't go around stripping in front of others. They really hadn't understood what the big deal was about it. Edensaw came into the living room and nodded at Watchie, who got off the floor, where he sat and headed for the bathroom for his turn in the shower. Edensaw lowered himself to the couch cushion beside Cassidy. His long hair was still damp, but he had combed it with the spare comb she'd given the men to use. She looked at his chest. There were a few beads of water on it. Quick flash of her leaning in and licking the moisture away flitted through her mind before she pushed it aside. Even though she and Edensaw had fooled around a bit at the campsite, Cassidy had decided she'd better slow things down a bit. The men were like babies in some way, having to be taught everything about the world they'd awakened to. Then there was what they were and what Edensaw wanted from her. She was very attracted to him and wanted nothing more than to have him as hers, but she still knew very little about what it meant to be his mate. He was immortal. She was not. He was a werewolf. Well, she was not. Cassidy had thought of taking the Wolf brothers to the local Tlingit tribe, but she wasn't sure that was a great idea yet. She couldn't very well introduce them as Ice Age Tlingit hunters who'd slept in an ice cave for 10,000 years. They'd think she was crazy as anyone else would who hadn't been there when she'd found the men. For now, it looked as if she'd have full responsibility for them, which meant they'd be living in cramped quarters until she figured out what to do with the men. Even though she made not bad money at her job as a graphic artist working from home, having to feed 6 extra people was going to put a strain on her finances, but she wasn't about to turn them out. Once the showers were done and it grew late, Cassidy felt eyes watching her. She turned her head to find Edensaw staring at her with a look that made her pussy clench. He seemed to eat her up with his gaze. Her heart beat faster and her nipples grew taut. She licked her suddenly dry lips. His gaze dropped to her mouth and seemed to heat up even more. "I think it's time we found our sleep," Edensaw said in a husky voice. He spoke loud enough for the others to hear. Cassidy nodded. Going to bed wasn't a bad idea. She needed to get away from Edensaw's sultry looks. "All right. Since there is only the one bedroom and bed, you guys are going to have to sleep out here on the floor. One of you can have the couch, but I'll let you decide that amongst yourselves." She stood, then walked to the windows and pulled the curtains closed. They were thick and dark enough to block out some of the late-night sunshine. That completed, she turned off the television before heading to her bedroom. Once inside, she turned to shut the door and just about jumped out of her skin. Edensaw was directly behind her. Cassidy held a hand to her chest. "You scared the crap out of me." "I didn't hear you come up behind me like that." He grinned. "Sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. Was there something you wanted?" Edensaw ran a heated gaze up and down her body, which had her pussy clenching. "With need again?" "Yes, very much." "That would be." In way of an answer, he crowded her farther into the room and then shut the door. He reached for her, but Cassidy stepped back. Edensaw looked at her with confusion on his face. "Is something wrong, Cassidy? I thought you wouldn't mind if I shared your bed with you." Oh, she didn't mind. That was part of the problem. "I don't know if that would be a good idea." "Why?" "I don't think we should rush things. You're still adjusting to my world, and I still have to adjust to what you are. Throwing sex into the mix might not be a great idea right now. You still aren't comfortable with my wolf side." Edensaw said it as a statement. Cassidy shook her head. I'm not. Then we'll have to make it so you are. Before Cassidy could say anything more, Edensaw shifted to his dire wolf form. The panic she'd felt the first time she'd seen the men change to their furry side threatened to rise inside her. She fought to keep it down. It's all right, Cassidy. I'm nothing to fear, Edensaw said in her mind. Come and touch me. Get used to me being in this form. He jumped up onto her bed and lay down. Swallowing, Cassidy sat on the mattress next to Edensaw. She turned to face him and crossed her legs. She ran her gaze over him. He really was a beautiful wolf. He ducked his head and licked her fingers. Touch me, Cassidy. She reached out to touch the top of his lupin head. Edensaw shifted closer until his side rested against her legs. Cassidy ran her hand along each of his ears before she stroked down his neck to his back. His black fur was soft. He thumped his tail on the bed as he wagged it. She continued to pet him, sinking her fingers into his thick fur. After a while she forgot he was a werewolf. It was as if she petted a real wolf, which she was. She was touching an animal that had become extinct thousands of years ago. When shifted, the Wolf brothers were the last of the dire wolves. Edensaw stretched out even more, laying his head on her lap. She continued her downward stroking to his tail and ran it through her loose grip. Cassidy soon lost herself to petting him, liking the closeness that brought her. The longer she ran her fingers through his fur, the less she felt as if she had anything to fear from him. The wolf's body shimmered and blurred. Then Eden saw the man sat before her. He cupped her face in his hands and took her lips in a kiss that was sweet and gentle. He ended it by lifting his head but didn't release her. He stared into her eyes. I want you as I have not wanted another, Cassidy. Just having you touch me in my wolf form has my mating urge digging its claws deeper into me. My body aches for yours, though I would never force you to do something you aren't ready for. I need to have you in my arms as I sleep. I would like nothing more than to give you pleasure as I did last night, and have you do the same for me. Right now, I'll ask for nothing more. Cassidy's willpower weakened. She'd never had a man stare at her with such longing. That look alone was enough to bring her to full arousal. She remembered how good it had felt to have Edensaw hold her and stroke her body the night before. She craved his hands on her. Now that they were alone in her bedroom, the others unable to see what they did, she didn't think she could deny Edensaw. She'd only be denying herself at the same time. She nodded. Okay, you can stay. Edensaw kissed her again, but this time it was demanding and carnal. He pushed his tongue into her mouth and dueled with hers. A low wolf's growl rumbled out of him as he put his arms around her and pulled her against his chest. He fell backward, his lips not leaving hers. Cassidy arranged herself so she straddled his hips, her pussy against his hard cock, her breasts pressed to his wide chest. She ground herself along his shaft, causing wetness to pool deep inside her body. Edensaw tugged up the bottom of her shirt. She broke their kiss and sat straight on him. She pulled her top over her head and then tossed it to the floor. With his heated gaze watching her every move, she reached around to her back and undid the hooks on her bra. That too she threw to floor once she freed herself of it. Edensaw exerted gentle pressure on her back until she leaned over him with her hands on either side of his head supporting her weight. He cupped a breast and brushed his lips across it. Cassidy sucked in a sharp breath as a surge of desire shot through her straight to her pussy. He did it again before he opened his mouth and sucked her nipple into it. She ground against his cock, wishing there were no clothes between them. Edensaw rocked his hips up into her. It increased the delicious pressure enough to have her moaning. He switched to her other breast to pay it the same attention as he had the other. Cassidy wanted more, but she remembered how Edensaw had given her pleasure and had taken nothing for himself the first time he'd had her in his arms. Tonight would be different. They couldn't make love fully, but she would make sure he reached completion. Once he released her breast, Cassidy shifted to Edensaw's side and lowered his underwear. She didn't stop until she had them down his legs and off. With a toss they landed on the floor. Turning back to what she'd revealed, she bit her bottom lip. His cock was fully engorged. He was thick and long and would fill her pussy. She looked up to see his eyes glowed. Cassidy ran her gaze from his face and down the length of his muscular body, back at his shaft, She reached out and ran the tip of her finger along it. Jumped at her touch. She licked her lips in anticipation of what she was going to do to him. With her fingers wrapped around his cock, she pumped her hand up and down. Edensaw made a sound that was more a wolf's growl than a moan. He thrust his shaft harder into her grip, matching her strokes. When a bead of pre-cum appeared on the very tip, Cassidy gathered it up and worked it along his shaft, using it as a natural lubricant. Shifting once again, she straddled his thighs. Cassidy continued to pump him until he whispered her name. Taking mercy on him, she gripped him at the base of his cock, then swirled her tongue around the flared head. Edensaw said something she didn't understand on a gasp. She parted her lips and sucked him inside. In and out she took his cock, sucking on him. What she couldn't manage she stroked with her fist. Edensaw thrust his hips, his hands clutching the sheets at his sides. His shaft grew harder and his breathing became labored. Cassidy would have continued to pleasure him that way until he came, but Edensaw wasn't having that. He gently pulled out of her grasp, then rolled her to her back. He made quick work of freeing her of her pants since she donned a pair of yoga pants after her shower. Her panties didn't last much longer, either. Once she was as naked as he, Edensaw ran his large hands over her body. He dipped his head to suck on a nipple, then continued downward. Edensaw settled between her legs, using his shoulders to spread them wider. He kissed his way up one of her inner thighs and then the other. Cassidy panted, unable to stop from lifting her hips and offering each time he came close to her pussy. Edensaw, please, she said on a groan. She had no trouble begging for what she wanted. He growled before he dragged his tongue along her wet opening. Cassidy let out a whimpered moan. Edensaw licked her and then sucked on her clit. The tension inside her coiled tighter as he lapped at her. He pushed 2 fingers into her pussy and stroked them in and out, heightening the pleasure she felt, pushing her desire ever higher. Come for me, he said in a husky voice. I want to taste you as you do. So close, she gasped. He pumped his fingers faster and sucked on her clit. Edensaw stroked her in just the right spot to have her tumbling into climax. Cassidy strained against the digits inside her, her pussy clutching them as wave after wave of pleasure surged through her. Once it was over, she went limp but quickly gathered her wits about her as Edensaw rose between her legs and put her hand around his hard cock. She wrapped her other one around the back of his neck and brought his lips down to meet hers. He growled and moaned into her mouth as she stroked his shaft. He pushed into each downward motion. Pre-cum leaked onto her hand and his cock grew harder. Cassidy pumped her fist faster. Just as Edensaw reached orgasm, he released her lips and threw back his head and howled. His cum pulsed onto her belly. After it was over, he remained hard. She looked down at him. You didn't go soft. Another gift the turn gave us, he said in a husky voice. I can remain erect for hours at a time and come more than once before that happens. For now, this single time was enough. Edensaw settled next to Cassidy. She reached for some tissue on the nightstand closest to her and then cleaned herself up before she went into his open arms. With her head cradled on his chest, his heart beat at a rapid pace under her ear. She relaxed against him and let sleep slowly pull her under. He knew the instant Cassidy fell asleep. Her body settled closer and went limp. Edensaw kissed the top of her head. Tiredness pulled at him, but he wasn't ready to drift off just yet. He looked at his mate. Even though she'd made him come, it did nothing to settle his mating urge. It only increased it. The need to claim her as his beat at him, but not bad enough that he felt desperate to force her to accept him. At least he'd managed to convince her to take him to her bed. He hadn't liked the idea that she thought they should slow down their relationship. He might not be desperate, but not having even this giving pleasure to one another would have made his mating urge unbearable. He needed to have his scent all over her, to mark her as his so other males would know she was taken. He didn't have to worry about his wolf brothers. It was the other werewolves out there he hoped to find that he wanted to get that message across to. Thinking about the werewolf race descended from he and the others, Edensaw knew they'd have to start searching for them tomorrow, no matter how hard Cassidy thought it would be. The best way was for him and his wolf brothers to walk the streets so they could sniff one out. Their scent would give them away no matter how much they looked like the mortals around them. With that plan in mind, Edensaw closed his eyes and tightened his arms around his mate. She sighed. He might have lost all his family while he slept, but he looked forward to starting a new one with Cassidy. I still think this will be like looking for a needle in a haystack, Cassidy said as she walked down one of the streets in downtown Juneau. Maybe so, but it is the best way to find one, Edensaw replied. If we pick up a scent trail and it isn't too old, we should be able to follow it right to the source. All right. Then I guess the best places to search next will be at the mall and some of the bigger grocery stores. The mall will be our first stop since we still need to buy all of you clothes and shoes. Might as well kill two birds with one stone. They'd been walking up and down the main drag for almost an hour and hadn't met with any success. The Nugget Mall was the next logical step. At least Cassidy thought it would be, but there was no telling if any werewolves would be there shopping at the same time. She had a feeling they'd be hitting the mall for days. They piled into her crossover, and she made the 9-mile drive to the mall. It was the middle of the afternoon on a Saturday, so it promised to be at its busiest. Cassidy usually avoided it on this day of the week since she hated having to deal with crowds. She liked to get in, buy what she needed, and get the hell back out without having to wait in lines. The parking lot ended up being close to full, which meant the mall was guaranteed to be packed as she'd thought it would be. She just hoped the men wouldn't be too uncomfortable. It had taken some getting used to on their parts to see all the people walking around downtown. This promised to be even worse. Once they were all out of the car, Edensaw came to her side and laced their fingers together before they walked toward the mall. He'd seen other couples doing it earlier and had immediately taken her hand after she'd told him most people who were in a relationship walked that way. After stepping through the mall doors, they worked their way into the crowd of people shopping. Soon they were able to find a clear spot to stand off to the side. Cassidy looked at the men. They watched everyone who went by. You guys okay? She asked. They each nodded. Good. It isn't always this busy. It's only like this because it's a Saturday. Since you aren't familiar with the mall yet or being in such a crowd, don't wander off. If you do, it could take a while before we find you. This is a very big place. Don't worry, I have no intention of leaving you, Wachi said. I would not like to get lost in a place like this. Just remember to be on the lookout for any werewolves, Edensaw added. If you do pick up a scent trail before the rest of us, don't go off on your own. We'll follow it together. With that reminder, Cassidy led the men to the first store she planned to take them. There they picked out the rest of the clothes they would need. Having the Wolf brothers try them on in the change rooms was an experience she wouldn't soon forget. She didn't think the guy who worked in the store would either. When something didn't fit, they would walk out in their underwear to tell her. She was glad to pay for the items and leave. The next place they went to was an athletic shoe store. Since she had no idea what sizes they needed, she had to enlist the help of the salesman to measure their feet. He gave their boots a strange look but didn't make any comment about them. Luckily, it didn't take long for the men to find runners they liked and found comfortable. The boots ended up being put into bags so they could wear the shoes home. That all accomplished, Cassidy felt about ready for a rest. Not the type of woman who liked to go shopping all the time, she'd found this bout tiring and a strain on her nerves. She headed for one of the benches, needing to sit for few minutes. The men followed her. Give me some time to rest my feet, then we can go on our search, Cassidy said. Durlac's head shot up and he turned it to his right as he took a big sniff of air. Do you smell that scent? He asked before dragging in more air through his nose. Kajakti nodded. I've picked up on it as well. Edensaw, Wachi, Kata, and Capac turned in the direction where the other two men stood and nodded before saying they smelled it also. Cassidy looked from one man to another. You're kidding me, right? You aren't telling me you picked up the scent of a werewolf already? Not one but two, Edensaw said. They're together. You can smell their scent trail that easily even though there are hundreds of people in the mall. Yes, werewolves have a distinctive scent compared to that of a mortal. Cassidy rose to her feet. All right then. Let's find them. She thought to let the men take the lead, but Edensaw grabbed her hand and pulled her to the front with him as they walked at a brisk pace through the throngs of people. Cassidy had to almost run to keep up with his long strides. They came to an abrupt stop in front of a clothing store that looked to cater to younger women. The Wolf brothers' gazes turned to two teenage girls who stood just inside. One was native-looking and the other was white. They appeared to be around 19 years old. Those two girls are what you're looking for, are they? Cassidy asked. Yes, Edensaw said. Said girls suddenly stopped talking and turned their heads in their direction. As if they'd heard what Cassidy and Edensaw had said. They whispered to each other before leaving the store and coming to where Cassidy and the men stood. The native girl looked at each of them before she spoke. Who are you guys? What do you want with my friend and me? We need you to take us to your pack, Edensaw answered. Why? You should already know where to find our pack leader. Every werewolf new to Juneau knows to go see him. Cassidy decided to join the conversation before the men said something about having slept for 10,000 years in an ice cave. The girls didn't need to know that right now. Maybe you could give us the address of your pack leader. The native girl looked at Cassidy. You're mortal. What are you doing with 6 male werewolves? Edensaw answered. Cassidy is helping us. Plus, she is to be my mate. The girl's eyes widened. Your mate is immortal? The white girl asked with surprise lacing her words. I've never heard of one of our kind having a mortal mate before. How would it work? We live so much longer than they do. Like a couple of 1,000 years longer. Cassidy felt the sting of that. It was something she hadn't been able to stop thinking about. Edensaw was immortal. He'd always stay the same. She, on the other hand, would be lucky if she had another 60 years of life left in her. She dragged her thoughts to the present when Kata pushed past her and went right up to the native girl and buried his nose in her hair as he took a deep breath. The girl tried to shove him away, but he gave her one last sniff before he turned to look at his wolf brothers with a large smile. She's one of mine, he said. The girl pushed him again. Dude, get the hell out of my personal space. I'm not yours. That didn't deter Durlak, Capac, Kajakti, and Wachiai from crowding around the other girl and giving her a good sniff. She gave each of them a shove and let out a very quiet growl as she snapped her teeth at them. Capac was the one who said, She's mine. She's a feisty thing too. I'm not yours, asshole. I'll be damned if I'm your mate, weirdo, the white girl said, accompanied by a kick to his thigh. Obviously not expecting it since he was still beaming with a look of pride on his face. Capac didn't move out of the way to avoid it. His leg buckled a bit, but he recovered quickly. Kajakti laughed. I'm glad that one is yours and not mine, Capac. She looks to be a handful. Seeing the girls appeared to be about ready to bolt, Cassidy stepped in between them and the men. Edensaw wisely stayed outside the circle. Guys, back up and give the girls some breathing room, she said as she pushed each man away so it was just her and the teenagers standing together. Cassidy looked at them. Sorry about that. The boys don't mean anything by it, and Kata and Capac aren't referring to you as their mates. Something else entirely. The native girl crossed her arms and glared at Kata before she returned her gaze to Cassidy. All right. Then what do they mean with that comment? Cassidy gave her a sheepish look. Well, you see, it's something I think would be better discussed with your pack leader first. So if you could give us his address, we'd really appreciate it. What are your names? I'm Cassidy and this is Edensaw, Wachiai, Kajakti, and Durlak. Of course you know Kata and Capac. She pointed to each of the wolf brothers in turn. I'm Lindsay and this is my friend Amanda. Since you're with them and mortals usually don't know about what we are, I think it would be best if I take you to him. He's my father. Cassidy smiled. That would be great. You can follow my car. We can do that. Cassidy hoped the meeting with the pack leader went well. If anyone could help the wolf brothers fit into the mortal world as werewolves, it would be others of their kind. Chapter 6. They followed the two girls to the parking lot. Cassidy marked where their car was before she ushered the men into the crossover. She couldn't get over there. Luck in finding two werewolves, and that one happened to be the daughter of the pack leader in Juneau. Cassidy had been sure it would take months to literally sniff one out. Fate had to be on their side, it would seem. Cassidy drove to where the girls waited, then slipped in behind them as Lindsay, who drove a compact car, headed for the exit that would take them onto the street. The trip took them to the outskirts of the city where the homes sat on fair-sized pieces of land. Pulling into the drive of one, Cassidy noted the large home at the end of it. She'd probably driven by it 1,000 times without knowing a werewolf owned. She parked the crossover behind Lindsay's car before she and the men got out to join the girls by the front of the house. Come inside, Lindsay said. My dad should be home. They followed her. Lindsay walked a little farther in before she yelled, Dad, come here. It wasn't long before she heard a set of footsteps coming from the upper level. A man also native like Lindsay came down the stairs that ended at the small foyer. Cassidy assumed this had to be Lindsay's father, the pack leader. He wore his black hair long and looked no older than about 25, but from what his daughter had said about them living longer than mortals, it didn't surprise Cassidy all that much. She figured he was older than he looked. Lindsay's father looked at them before he turned his gaze onto his daughter. I thought you'd gone to the mall. Who are they? I was at the mall and that's where I met them. They wanted to see you. She introduced them to her father. Cassidy held out her hand to shake the pack leaders, but Edensaw was quick to grab onto it and pull it out of reach. He didn't let it go, even though she tugged it a few times. Lindsay's father was quick to look between Edensaw and Cassidy. I'm Bryce. You must be new in town. I'm not, Cassidy said. I'm Cassidy. I've lived here my whole life. Technically the men have as well. Sort of. Would it be okay if we talk to you somewhere private? Bryce nodded. Sure. We can go to my den. They followed him farther into the house and down a short hallway to a closed door, leaving the two girls in the foyer. Bryce opened it and then walked inside. Cassidy and the men walked behind him before they divided themselves up between the couch and the two armchairs that were in the large room. Bryce pulled out the chair from behind his desk and brought it closer. Okay, what is this all about? Cassidy, I know you're mortal and that they are werewolves. How did you learn what they were? We've done our best to keep knowledge of our kind from yours. The way Edensaw reacted when you tried to shake my hand, I take it you're his mate. I'm not his mate yet. We just met a couple of days ago. She paused. I'm not sure how to say what I have to say without having you think we're all nuts. Bryce nodded, then spoke to the men. What nation are you from? We're Tlingit, Edensaw answered. I'm the alpha of our pack. Alpha? Don't you mean pack leader? Bryce asked. Where is the rest of your pack? Edensaw motioned to the other men. We are the only members of our pack. Bryce's brows drew together. Just the 6 of you and no females? Plus I don't like the idea of another pack being in my territory. I have no intention of challenging you, but we will remain as we are. Then I have the right to drive you out of Juneau. Cassidy sensed the tension between Edensaw and Bryce building. It wasn't going to help them if she didn't nip it in the bud right now. She butted into their conversation. Bryce, sorry to interrupt, but you have no idea where Edensaw and the others have come from and what they truly are. I don't understand. I thought you said they were from Juneau. They are sort of, as I said. I kind of found them in an ice cave on the Matanuska Glacier. They'd been there sleeping for 10,000 years. Bryce gave her a perplexed look. What? Cassidy sighed before she turned her gaze on Edensaw. I think you'd better tell him what you are. Edensaw nodded, then looked at Bryce. What Cassidy said is true. We are from the time when ice mostly covered the land. We are the Sentinels, the first werewolves. All of you who have come after us are our descendants. Our shaman turned us to fight the evil that is to come. We made sure the race of werewolves would live on, then he put my wolf brothers and me to sleep in the ice cave. Bryce shook his head. You can't be them. The story of the Sentinels, how they were created and how they slept until they are needed, is only a tale that has been passed down through my family. We are long-lived, but no werewolf has lived for 10,000 years. We can only expect to reach 3,000 years of age at most. You can't be that, Edensaw. The others can't be the actual Capac, Wachii, Durlak, Kata, and Kajakti. The shaman made us true immortals. We are what and who we say we are. Cassidy could see Bryce still wasn't convinced by his silence. She figured the pack leader was going to need some concrete proof. She was sure he'd see the difference as soon as the Wolf brothers took on their other forms. Edensaw, I think you and the others should shift. He nodded. As the men stood and arranged themselves in the open space in front of Bryce, the pack leader said, It isn't necessary for them to shift. I already know. They're werewolves from their scent. Cassidy stood as well and stepped to the side to get a better look at Bryce. That's not what they're going to prove when they do. The Wolf brothers' bodies shimmered and blurred as they took on their wolf forms. Once the change was complete and 6 black direwolves look up at Bryce, the pack leader's gaze skipped from one to the next. There, Bryce said before his words trailed off. He wore an expression of shock. Direwolves? Yes. Cassidy has told us the wolves we once ran with no longer exist. Is this what you needed to see to make you believe we tell the truth? Edensaw asked, obviously projecting his thoughts to Bryce as well as Cassidy and his wolf brothers. Holy shit, Bryce said as he shot to his feet. You can communicate telepathically while a wolf. Kata took a step closer to Bryce. Yes, we all can. You are descended from me. You are not capable of it? No. Plus, I've heard of no other werewolf being able to communicate like that. Once shifted, we understand keep the same intelligence but communication is beyond us. Bryce stared down at Kata. You're my ancestor? Kata lifted his lupin head up and down in way of a nod. Yes. Picked up our shared bloodline through your scent, as I did in your daughters. I guess not. All of our abilities were passed on to future generations. Can you all please shift back? Bryce asked. I'm not used to having someone talk to me inside my mind. Once the Wolf brothers were again human, he continued as his gaze lingered on Kata. What other abilities do you have? Edensaw answered. Besides being truly immortal and telepathic, the shaman promised us we'd be able to bond with the woman meant for us and truly make her our mates. We have the bond. After we find our mates, our mating urge is set off. Once we've claimed her fully, a bond joins us and we aren't able to stand to be apart from each other for very long. What do you mean by true mates? Edensaw glanced at Cassidy, then focused back on Bryce. We go through the mating urge. Cassidy set mine off when she found us. That is how she woke me up, even though the time wasn't for us to awaken. As for true mates, I can turn her into a werewolf exactly like me with one bite while I'm in my wolf form. You do not do this with mortal mates. Bryce stared at Edensaw for a few seconds. He looked as if someone had just sucker punched him. Cassidy wasn't feeling much better. Edensaw hadn't told her that part about his being able to make her a werewolf, immortal and all. You're in the throes of the mating urge and you aren't feeling driven by it? Bryce asked. As for the turning part, you're the first werewolf I've known who has a mortal for a mate. We can't turn them. As far as we knew, the only way to be a werewolf was to be born one. No, my mating urge isn't controlling me, Edensaw said. I feel the need to claim Cassidy as my mate, but I can wait until she is ready to accept me as hers. I had no idea we Sentinels would be so different from our descendants. Bryce shook his head. I had no idea you guys actually existed. My generation is the third to have heard of the tale of the Sentinels. I haven't even told my daughter yet. We figured it was just a made-up story. You believe us now? Edensaw asked. Yes, of course. Another part of the tale is how only the Sentinels and the children they sire before going into their long sleep were able to shift into dire wolves. Bryce sat in his chair, and everyone else took their seats once more. So if you guys are real, then I suppose the evil you were created to fight against is real as well. Yes, it is. The enemy is werewolves who were created from the darkest of magic. I felt the presence of their evil slowly growing while I slept. If they should rise in numbers, they are a threat not only to werewolves such as yourself but also to the mortals who share this world. I thought lone wolves were bad, Bryce said with a sigh. Lone wolves? Kata asked. When a werewolf breaks too many pack laws or is violent to others, they are forced to leave the pack and go lone wolf. Not all of them are bad, though. Few are good, who would rather live on their own with no affiliations. I see. We're going to have to teach you what it means to be a modern-day werewolf. I was hoping you would take on that job, Cassidy said. I can't teach them any of that. I didn't even know werewolves existed until I found them. I've introduced them to modern society, helped them to fit in, but that's all I can do. Bryce nodded. You've done a great job of that. It's understandable that you wouldn't be able to teach them what else they need to learn. The rest of my pack and I can take care of that. Cassidy didn't look at Edensaw when she asked the next thing on her mind. Would you be able to find them another place to stay? Bryce gave her a questioning look. Are you sure that is what you want? Edensaw is your mate. I don't think I have much choice. I live in a one-bedroom apartment. I don't have the space for all of us. I think they'd be more comfortable in a bigger place. No, Edensaw said. We will stay with you. Cassidy turned her gaze on Edensaw. You haven't claimed me yet. Think it would be better if you and the others become more familiar with your kind before we take that step. You said your mating urge isn't controlling you, so maybe it would be better if I stepped out of the picture for a while until you've learned what you need to know. Edensaw grabbed her around the waist and dragged her onto his lap. He cupped her face and forced her to meet his gaze. You will not leave me. Yes, my mating urge is manageable, but that would change if I wasn't with you for days on end. It would make it worse. Just the thought of it makes it dig its claws into me deeper. If we were to do that, I'd take your choice from you as soon as we were reunited. I don't think I'd be able to help myself. Bryce cleared his throat. I have to agree with Edensaw. Being separated from you isn't what he needs right now. Without taking her gaze from Edensaw, Cassidy said, You'll feel stifled at my apartment after a while. I don't have the wide-open spaces for you to roam as you did before you slept. I can't afford to buy a house on a big chunk of land. The gold nuggets you all have won't be enough either. Gold wasn't the only thing the shaman gave us, Durlak said as he took off the leather pouch that hung around his neck. He dumped the contents into his hand and held it out. Besides the gold nugget, there were 5 different types of stones. Bryce stood and came to Durlak. He picked up each rock, then studied the one shaped like a sugar cube, translucent with a touch of yellow to it. An expression of shock formed on his face. Well, here's another huge surprise, Bryce said. The other 4 stones are pieces of jade, garnet, amethyst, and rhodonite. This, he held up the almost clear stone higher. This is a diamond. One that looks to be almost 2 carats. That really is a diamond? Cassidy asked, probably feeling as shocked as Bryce appeared to be. Finding diamonds in Alaska was a rare event. So few had been found over the years. From your reactions, I assume a diamond is something good? Durlak asked. Bryce nodded. Yes, they're worth more than the gold. More than the other stones. That is good, Wachi said. We all have the same stones in our pouches, even the diamond. Cassidy, Bryce said with a smile, I don't think you have to worry about not being able to afford to buy a new place. Once these precious and semi-precious stones along with the gold nuggets are converted to cash, you'll have more than enough. If they agree to it. I can't take it. It wouldn't be right. Then don't, but you can help us find a home where we can all live together. Edensaw said. Cassidy slowly nodded. All right, I can do that. Edensaw turned her face toward his. That means you won't be leaving us. Correct. She smiled. Correct. It looks as if your shaman made sure you'd be well prepared for this world. He gave you the means to survive in it. He must have had some strong magic. He did. In your story, Bryce, does it say what happened to our shaman after he put us to sleep? Kajakti asked. Bryce gave the Wolf brothers a solemn look. Yes. Sadly, he died right after. He finished his spell to put you into your long rest. It drained the remainder of his magic and his life force. His son took his place as tribe shaman, but he was nowhere near as powerful as his father. The shaman's son was there when we went into our long sleep. Only the 2 of them were to keep the knowledge of where we rested, Edensaw said. It became lost through the many years that passed afterward. The shaman's son must not have told anyone and took it to the grave with him. None of his descendants knew of it, which helped to make your story seem as if it wasn't fact. As the conversation turned to Bryce asking questions about the Wolf brothers' lives during the Ice Age, Edensaw placed Cassidy on her feet in front of him. Before he stood, he took her hand and walked her to the far corner of the room. He placed her in it and crowded her with his body, blocking her from the others' view. He ducked his head and looked at her. Are you still willing to give us a chance? Worry was in Edensaw's brown eyes. Yes. I only thought to do what would be best for you and the others. I can't give you everything you need. Edensaw put his hands on either wall near her head. You are the only thing I need. It took 10,000 years to find you, and you now own my heart. Beats only for you. Cassidy swallowed back the emotions that threatened to rise to the surface. In The den of the local pack leader was not the place to make a scene by. Blubbering like a baby from the strong feelings Eden Saw's words invoked in her. "You're leaving me almost speechless here, Eden Saw," she said as she gave him a trembling smile. "No man has ever told me I've meant that much to him before. My history with the opposite sex hasn't been great. They weren't meant to have you as theirs. You were fated to be mine. If that wasn't the truth, I never would have awoken. I would claim you today if you would let me. Turn me into an immortal werewolf? You forgot to mention that part when you first told me I was your mate." Eden Saw gave her a small grin. "You didn't exactly react well when you learned we were werewolves. I can still claim you and have the mating bond form between us without you being turned. We can wait to do that. You really have given me an awful lot to think about." He closed the distance between their lips and took them in a possessive kiss. Cassidy soon forgot about where she was and that there were other people in the room with her and Eden Saw. He turned her world upside down, but she had to think it was in a good way. Already she felt more for him than she had for any man before him. At the rate she was going, it would only be a matter of days before she handed him her heart and accepted all that her immortal werewolf mate off. Chapter 10. A week had gone by since Tanner's visit and Cassidy being turned. So far they hadn't heard anything from the lone wolf who had threatened to retaliate after Eden Saw had refused to align with him. She wondered if Tanner was all talk. But Bryce had assured them all that wasn't the case. Every day they kept an eye out for Tanner when they left the house, thinking he would jump out at them when they were least expecting it. Cassidy hated having to always watch her back while doing something as simple as going to the grocery store. Not that Eden Saw or the others let her go by herself. Her mate stuck to her like glue, and made sure at least one of his wolf brothers accompanied them wherever they went. At least they'd had no problem with her going wolf with them 2 days after she was turned and taking that run through the trees on their property. Cassidy now understood what Durlac had meant about it, giving her a sense of freedom she couldn't experience as a human. Once Tanner was no longer a threat, Eden Saw had said they'd take her hunting in wolf form. She'd go maybe chase a critter or two, but she wouldn't be making a kill. Even though she was a werewolf, she still preferred to get her meat from the grocery store. Since the move and settling into her new life as a werewolf, Cassidy had gotten a little behind on her work. Today she decided to make a concerted effort to get caught up. Eden Saw and the others were in another part of the house doing their own thing while she worked in the den just off the dining room. It was the perfect size for an office and let in a lot of light from the French doors that opened onto their large backyard. Cassidy lost track of the time as she slipped into her normal work routine. With her keener hearing, she'd hear the Wolf brothers talking in one of the other rooms, but it wasn't enough to distract her from what she was doing. She'd made some good headway into some of the projects she had to finish when Cassidy suddenly felt as if someone watched her. Her first response was to look toward the closed den door, half expecting one of the men standing there. But it was still shut and no one had come inside. With the sensation still persisting, she looked toward the French doors, the only other access to the room. She thought it could be one of the men trying to bug her. Kata had stood outside there more than once while she'd worked, waiting for her to notice him, then wave before walking away. Only this time it wasn't Kata or any of the others. A man she'd never seen before was just on the other side, staring at her. His eyes glowed as a werewolf's did as he took a few steps back, then barreled into the glass doors, breaking through them. He shifted the instant he was inside the room. He growled and bared his teeth as he bunched his hind legs underneath him, getting ready to launch himself at her. Cassidy screamed. Bryce waited for Nat, a younger member of his pack, to take a seat in one of the chairs that faced Bryce's desk. The boy looked nervous as hell and Bryce had no idea what Nat wanted to talk to him about. Nat had called about a half hour ago to set up this meeting without giving a hint as to what he wanted to discuss. "So what's up, Nat? I was surprised when you called." The boy fidgeted in his seat. "I think I've gotten myself into something I can't get out of on my own." "You can't go to your family for help?" "No. Once they find out what I've done." Nat let his words trail away. "No. Only you can fix the mess I've made." Bryce leaned back in his chair. "All right. Tell me what it is and I'll see what I can do." Nat ran a hand through his hair. "I've really fucked up. I owed someone a lot of money. He knows I've done some things I'm not proud of." He swallowed. He's using them against me, getting me to do favors for him that I wouldn't normally agree to. Such as giving him information he had no right to know. Bryce sat straighter as a bad feeling went through him. What kind of information are you talking about here? Who is the one forcing you to do this? Pack stuff. Recently, information about the Wolf brothers and what they're capable of doing. Nat gave him an apologetic look. It's Tanner. He told me if I didn't give him what he wanted he'd tell my dad everything. Bryce swore. Now he knew who gave Tanner info about the pack. Nat's father had been one of the people Bryce had told about the Wolf brothers. Obviously, the boy had overheard something at home. He let out a long breath. I'll take care of Tanner. Just tell me where you've been meeting with him, where he hangs out. I'll round up some other pack members and we'll take care of the mess you've made. Nat wrung his hands. There's more. Tanner's planning to make a move against the Wolf brothers today. He might already be at their house now. He has other lone wolves with him. Tanner is going to try to see just how immortal Edensaw is. If he can, he's going to take the alpha wolf brother out. Bryce surged to his feet. Get out of here, Nat. I have to gather some men and get the hell out to Edensaw's place as fast as I can. You won't tell my father, will you? He growled. I won't promise you that. I'll deal with you once I've taken care of Tanner. Running out of his den, Bryce took his cell phone out of his pants pocket. Before he made the phone calls to have some of his strongest male pack members meet him at the Wolf brothers' house. He just hoped they wouldn't be too late, and that the Ice Age hunters would be more than capable enough to handle what Tanner would dish out. Cassidy didn't wait for the wolf to go on the attack. Using her new werewolf speed, she raced across the room to the den's door and yanked it open. Behind her, she heard the sound of more wolves coming in through the busted French doors. She ran with the first wolf hot on her tail in the direction Edensaw and the others would be. The sound of a fight taking place coming from the living room drew her there. When she arrived, she saw there were 4 other strange wolves battling with the Wolf brothers, who had all shifted, except for Edensaw. He kicked away one of their attackers as he ran toward her. He called her name. She went to race to him, but found herself grabbed from behind and thrown into the closest wall. She fell against it hard enough to knock the wind out of her. As she fought to catch her breath, Cassidy watched with horror as Tanner walked past her, took out a gun, and aimed it at Edensaw. He pulled the trigger and the weapon went off with a loud bang. She screamed her mate's name as he was knocked off his feet. Let's see if you can survive a bullet to the head, Tanner said with an evil-sounding laugh. Cassidy pulled herself to her feet and ran to Edensaw. She threw herself down at his side. No, 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 she wailed when she saw the bullet hole in his forehead. She placed her fingers at the large vein in his neck and felt for a pulse. There wasn't one. With tears streaming down her face, Cassidy lifted Edensaw's head and put it on her lap. She placed her hand on his chest that didn't rise and fall with his breath. As she wept, all hell broke loose around her. The remaining wolf brothers fought to take their attackers down. The sound of the front door slamming open vaguely registered, same as when Bryce and another group of werewolves barreled into the room and joined the fray. Cassidy couldn't think past the fact that Edensaw lay on the floor dead. Never again would he hold her in his arms and kiss her, or make love to her. She felt as if a piece of her had died right along with him. She now had an eternity to live without the only man she would ever love. She ignored the tears that continued to flow and looked at her mate. The battle still raged on around her, but it didn't matter. She kissed Edensaw's forehead, then jerked back as a fresh trickle of blood leaked from the wound. Speechless, she watched as the bullet pushed itself out and fell to the floor. A second later, his chest rose as he took a deep breath. His eyes remained closed. Gently, Cassidy lifted his head from her lap and put it on the floor before she shifted around to place her ear on his chest to better hear the sound of his heart beating. 2 seconds before it had been still and silent. Edensaw, she said frantically. Wake up. Please open your eyes. He groaned and reached up to touch the wound that was already starting to heal. My head hurts, he said in weak voice. He opened his eyes and looked at her. You're crying. What happened? Another flood of tears dripped down Cassidy's cheeks as she smiled. There. Happy tears now. I thought I lost you. At that moment the sound of fighting ceased. Cassidy looked up to see the other wolf brothers, and Bryce and his men had routed the intruders. The ones who were still conscious were being guarded and tied up by the werewolves Bryce had brought with him. The pack leader and wolf brothers rushed to Cassidy. Bryce squatted beside her. Is Edensaw okay? She gave him a watery smile. He is now. What about Tanner? Did you get him? Bryce shook his head. The bastard managed to slip away, but we'll get him. We've captured most of the other lone wolves he had with him. They'll give us the information we need to find Tanner. The wolf brothers helped their alpha to his feet. Cassidy and Bryce stood with them. Edensaw's face took on a greenish tinge. He groaned. The room is spinning and I feel as if I'll be sick if I move too fast. Cassidy looked at his brothers. He probably has a bit of a concussion still, though it won't last long considering how fast we heal. Can you guys carry him up to our room and put him into bed? Kata nodded. We'll get Edensaw settled for you. Then come back down and help Bryce take out the trash. Once Edensaw was gently lifted by his wolf brothers, Cassidy turned to Bryce. How did you know to come? I found out who was the leak in my pack. He came to me knowing he'd screwed. He's young and stupid, and Tanner took advantage of that. I'm glad he told you. So am I. You go take care of your mate. Let me handle the rest. Cassidy nodded, then headed up the stairs to hers and Edensaw's bedroom. She walked in to see her mate was stretched out on the bed. The others gave her a reassuring pat as each one left the room, the last shutting the door behind him. She crossed the distance to the bed and climbed up next to Edensaw. He opened his eyes and pulled her down so she lay at his side with her head on his chest. The sound of his heart beating was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. Are you okay? He asked. Now I am, but I should be asking you that. Cassidy put her arm across his stomach. You appeared dead there for a few seconds. Your heart stopped and you weren't breathing. Edensaw rubbed his hand up and down her back. I wasn't. It was similar to when the shaman had put me into my long sleep. I could hear you, but I couldn't move or speak. I guess my body had to heal enough before I recovered to do those things. It still was scary. I really thought you'd gone. He kissed the top of her head. I will never leave you, Cassidy. I'd even fight death if I had to. Cassidy closed her eyes and snuggled close, breathing in her mate's scent. I'd do the same for you. As Edensaw relaxed and he drifted off to sleep, she sent a silent thank you to the ancient shaman who'd given Edensaw to her. If he hadn't turned Edensaw and given him complete immortality, Cassidy would never have met the man of her dreams. Epilogue. Tanner ran deeper into the woods. He was in his wolf form. It had been a pretty close call back at the Wolf brothers' house, and a disappointing fiasco. He'd figured his attack on them would have played out better than it had, with him ending up the victor, but fucking Bryce and his men had to show up and sway the odds. Shooting Edensaw, Tanner had hoped it wouldn't kill the alpha. He'd thought it would slow Edensaw down long enough for Tanner to get a hold of Edensaw's mate. Once he had her, Tanner could have forced the alpha to do anything Tanner wanted. The first and foremost thing was turning him into an immortal werewolf. Now he had to start from square one. Most of the lone wolves he'd had on his side had been taken by Bryce. Tanner pulled up short as another wolf stepped out from behind one of the trees. It was a werewolf, but one he'd never seen before. The wolf's eyes mutedly glowed red, marking him as something far different than a normal one of his kind. The other shifted to his human form. Instead of his body shimmering and blurring, it was enveloped by a black, almost smoky mass. The change completed, it disappeared into nothingness. Hello, Tanner, the man said. He had black hair and eyes with the same height and build as any other werewolf. Tanner shifted. How do you know my name? The man smiled as he came closer. I've been watching you. You're just the kind of werewolf I'd like to join the ranks of my new pack. Why would I want to do that? If you do, I can give you the immortality you wish to get from the wolf brothers. All you have to do is swear fealty to me, and I'll give you what you want. If I don't join you? The man's eyes glowed a muted red. Then I'll have to put an end to your existence. I can't have a lone wolf messing with my plans for Edensaw and the others. Will you join me? Tanner didn't want to answer to any man, but the vibe this unknown werewolf gave off, he knew he wouldn't be walking away from this encounter if he refused. Plus, he wanted that immortality, would do almost anything for it. He nodded. I'll join your pack, but I want the immortality first before I swear fealty. That way I'll know you won't go back on your word. Of course. The man gave him a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Before Tanner could say anything else, the werewolf launched himself at Tanner, shifting to wolf form in midair. He hit Tanner hard enough to knock him onto his back and sank his teeth into his neck. Blinding pain tore through Tanner unlike anything he'd ever experienced. As he screamed, the werewolf shifted to his human form and then squatted over him. You have your immortality, but you forgot to ask what the cost was. Sorry to say I now own you body and soul.